Thank you, Scott. Thanks to the board member of the NBCC. It's a great honor for me to be associated with critics and authors that I've respected for so long. I don't know if I'm nervous or if this is just survivor's guilt. Oh, please, let's stop that. I gotta take that picture. 12 years ago, when I was hired to edit the book section of the Christian Science Monitor, I remember telling my great aunt Cecilia that we were moving away to Boston, where I would be writing book reviews. She said, well, surely they're not going to pay you to do that. So this is for you, Aunt Seal. Some muckraker at the New York Observer had suggested that I won this award because the NBCC wanted to stop the Washington Post from closing Book World. Mission accomplished. As usual, when it comes to the actions of the country's most powerful media companies, we know that the real strings are pulled by the book critics. Next time, give the poetry prize to Al Gore and see if you can stop global warming. So, here we are, with one standalone book section left along the East Coast, and it won't return my call. Recite valediction forbidding mourning or something. 25 years ago, I went to the Bennington Writing Seminar. For 4 weeks, an article in Esquire magazine had claimed that these writing seminars offered a chance to get drunk, get laid, and get an agent. But as a bad writer and a good Christian Scientist, I didn't get any of those things. In fact, I thought I was living on the edge just reading Esquire magazine. But I did have two marvelous teachers, Nicholas Delbanco, whose reviews I now have the pleasure of editing at the Post, and the late great critic, George Garrett. I should say poet, too. One day, George started class by reading us a poem that made an enormous impression on me. It's called To a Certain Critic. Walking in the woods, you turn over a rotten log. Out from under crawls something very snot-like and pale. If it could open its mouth and talk good English, you'd know exactly what you sound like to me. At that time of my life, this poem was a great encouragement to me. A cry of defiance against anyone who didn't appreciate my brilliant short stories. But now that I have become that pale, crawling, snot-like creature, I have a somewhat different attitude. Some of us are pining for the good old days, say 90 years ago when T.S. Eliot ruled over literary criticism, or 130 years ago when Henry James and his friend William Dean Howells taught Americans what they should be reading, or 200 years ago when Coleridge was laying down the principles of literary criticism. I would suggest that at this moment, many of us should be looking further back, say 80,000 years ago. We need to be better hunter-gatherers. I know there has long been a tension in this group between those of us who felt we were writing criticism with a capital C, and those of us who thought of ourselves as mere newspaper book critics. The implication is that helping people find books they might just want to enjoy reading was some kind of low-life consumer reports for books. But I think we ignore that role at our peril. I became convinced of this a couple of years ago. I'd written an essay in the Post op-ed section about people's reading habits and the tyranny of the bestseller list, and I received more than 300 letters in response. This is a completely new experience for me. After 12 years of weekly reviewing, the normal number of letters I get ranges between, say, 0 and the wife of the president of Liberia asking me to take temporary position of $74 million. So, 300 letters, many of them quite thoughtful, made an enormous impression. And they all had, many of these letters had one basic question. Where, they wanted to know, where could they find good suggestions about what to read? And I thought they were kidding, you know? But there were so many of them. And I thought that's what we were doing. But they were very earnest about it, and very heartfelt. A few especially brilliant, lucky critics will continue to be able to muse publicly about the free, indirect style, or talk about Barthelme's latest release of his high school diaries, or something like that. But for most of us foot soldiers in the field, we just need to help curious, literate people find books they want to read. It is more than ever not about us. It's about the books and their potential readers. I have almost no liquid left in my entire life. I used to teach for a living, and I was used to talking to people, but you know, when you're a book critic and an editor, you hardly ever talk to anyone. I'm reminded of that disappointed Native American Indian described by Henry David Thoreau in Walden. You might remember this. I tried to find a more politically correct example, but this is so good. This Indian was indignant because no one would buy the baskets that he had woven. He had not discovered, Thoreau writes, that it was necessary for him to make it worth the other's while to buy the baskets, or at least to make him think it so. I think for far too long we have been putting all our book reviews in one basket, and now we're seeing the effects and the results of that. The number of books continues to rise, and the advent of PDO and self-published books will only exaggerate that number. I'm already getting about 150 books a day. For all Chris Anderson's celebration of the long tail, from where I sit, it looks like a lot of ass. The problem of helping people find books. I won't sit down to say that. I just thought it was so damn funny. The problem of helping people find books they want to read is only going to get more extreme. And if we don't step up to the task, most people will be left in the echo chamber of the bestseller list. More and more of our critical judgment needs to take place before we ever get into print, in the process of selecting the books we review. And as we do that, we need to cultivate our capacity to be delighted. And that can be hard when you're facing 150 books a day. It isn't just a matter of raving about books. It's about a matter of finding books worth raving about, worth telling about. Books that might be worth somebody spending 10 to 20 hours of their precious time reading. That's the challenge we're being called upon to meet in this rapidly rising sea of words. Thank you so much for listening. I'm extremely grateful to you.